Hi, welcome to Coaster Mania. I'm Micah, and today I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions on Silverwood. This theme park is one of the most remote parks in the entirety of the US. This is specifically in relation to other theme parks around the country. For reference, the next closest major amusement park is Lagoon, which is located 10 hours away in Salt Lake City, Utah. Silverwood is located in Athol, Idaho, and was opened in 1988. No, I didn't misspeak. Athol is the real name of this real city. This park currently has almost 350 acres of land owned, but the theme park itself occupies roughly 35 acres. Now, call me a dreamer, but this park technically has the potential to be absolutely massive. There are some hurdles that the park has which could very well prevent something like this from happening, but hey, I can still dream, right? Silverwood was actually the first park that Katie and I visited together. Time for a lore dump. I grew up in the sunny state of California and moved up to the Pacific Northwest only a few years ago. After moving here, Katie and I met and have been partners in crime ever since. We visited the one major local amusement park together and continue to do so on a yearly basis. I will never claim to be a perfect reviewer, but after visiting several amusement parks around the country of various shapes and sizes, I feel like this gives us some basis to compare this one to. Ultimately, this video is nothing more than my opinions, so if you disagree, that's alright. Feel free to post down in the comments about that. Everyone has a different experience, and mine will definitely be different to yours, especially if you grew up with this park. If you aren't familiar with the way I do my review videos, I like to break them down into 10 sections. These are first impressions, theming, immersion, layout, amenities, food, staff, coasters, flat rides, and finally, operations. After detailing my thoughts on all of these aspects, I'll combine them together for an average score and give my final thoughts. So let's dive in. Based on its location and surrounding area, Silverwood almost makes itself feel even more remote than it actually is, and that's saying something because this park is out there. The reason why this is because it is an hour away from the nearest major city, which is Spokane. When you're driving up to the park, there's nothing but trees, mountains, and farmland. Anyways, moving on to the park itself. Silverwood is a park that takes a lot of cues from other major amusement parks around the US, but does things in a somewhat unique manner. For instance, in order to get to the front entrance of the park, you traverse through a tunnel underneath the highway. Another unique part about it is the giant sign on the lift hill of Timber Terror. This park does a good job at presenting itself to outsiders and doesn't hide anything from view. Walking through the front gates, there are some old American themed buildings which house the ticket booth, gift shops, and more. This front entrance area is nice, albeit a bit small. Moving on, once you first get into the park, you're presented with a choice. Head left to visit the amusement park or head right to visit the water park. You know what they say, if there's a fork in the road, you take it. In either direction is a fairly skinny path that leads straight to each respective section of the overall park. Moving into the rest of the amusement park side, there is a decent collection of flat rides and coasters, and everything for the most part looks pretty clean. I have never once had an issue with this park feeling unkempt or dirty, which is always a nice touch. Overall, I'd rate the first impressions of this park an 8 out of 10. I don't have too much to say about the theming at this park. There is an overall vaguely Western theme to the park, but other than that, it doesn't do too much. Most of the theming revolves around the entrance building of each ride and doesn't go much further than that. The park does have one area where it does do better than the rest, and this would be the area designated as Critter Camp. This area of the park is designated for families and is one of the nicer parts about it. The rest of the park has nice looking facades and some minor stylized elements, but it doesn't go anywhere near above and beyond to create a well-themed experience. I know that not every amusement park is trying to be Disney, but I have found that when a park has some well-themed areas, it just helps the overall experience feel a tad bit more magical. I will add, however, that Silverwood does put on a pretty good Halloween event. You can tell that they put a lot of pride and joy into their annual Scarywood haunt. I'll give credit where credit is due. If you're in the area, you definitely should not miss this event. Overall, I'd rate the theming of this park a 6 out of 10. Silverwood doesn't do everything in its power to keep you immersed. Sure, when you're inside the park, there isn't too many views outside, except when you first walk in. Other than that, the road noise from the freeway next to the park is fairly constant, and there's lots of views outside of the park into empty fields and residential areas. There are parts of the park that are far more immersive than others, but overall, this isn't one of its biggest strengths. I don't want to sound too negative, however, since the road noise is really only a thing when you're on the pathway next to Timber Terror and Aftershock. The rest of the park is fairly decent in this regard. In fact, from the highest heights, there's a good chance that what you'll mainly be seeing and focusing on is the beautiful looking nature that surrounds the park. There are mountains and trees all around the park in the distance, and does a good job at making it feel somewhat isolated. While it isn't as strong as other parks, it isn't even close to being the worst out there. Overall, I'd rate the Immersion a 7.5 out of 10. This park has a very unique layout compared to the rest of the parks we've been to. Due to how Coaster Alley is squeezed into a pretty narrow shape, the paths are pretty much located around the coasters wherever they can be. This isn't exactly a bad thing, since everything is easy to find and to navigate. The only complaint that I do have is that there are some areas that feel like there should be segments of path where there isn't. For instance, in the area right near the exit path of the Thunder Canyon River Rapids ride, there is a maintenance path that leads right up to the front entrance of Tremors. This area feels like it would provide for a great way to allow guests to navigate from this one area of the park to the next. Another spot that is similar to this is right next to the lift hill of Tremors. There's a maintenance path that leads straight from here to where Aftershock is. These potential paths would add just a little bit more freedom of mobility and really don't make or break it for the park. Everything else is easy to get to, and you'll never have to do too much walking to get where you want to. Overall, I'd rate the layout of Silverwood an 8.5 out of 10. This is a limited aspect of Silverwood in a sense, but not by a huge degree. You see, most of the food stalls are located in and around the Country Carnival section. Once you head out to Coaster Alley, you've got a limited selection of food and snack stalls, and then a couple of restrooms dotted about. Since the park is as small as it is, I'm willing to give it a pass, but it would be nice to see 1 or 2 more small food options in this area of the park. I do understand that this is a bit of a challenge due to some of the staffing issues this park faces, which is why I feel like an extra food or snack stall would do more than enough to suffice. For instance, it would be nice if there was an extra restroom near the Thunder Canyon area. Other than that, a lot of the rides at Silverwood are easily accessible via handicap means, and it seems that the park has a decent plan in place for guests with disabilities. Other than this, there are a decent number of shaded areas throughout the park. Also important to note, at most booths, you are able to ask to refill a hydro flask, but make sure to ask beforehand. Overall, I'd rate the amenities a 7 out of 10. I feel like I'm noticing a bit of a trend here. Silverwood's food situation is nothing bad, but it also isn't anything to write home about either. Sure, nothing here is particularly gut bomb inducing, but all the choices here are what you'd expect and doesn't stray any further from that. There's pizza, chicken tenders, burgers, barbecue, and Italian? Yeah, there's actually a nice little Italian restaurant near the front entrance of the park. If you're looking for something nicer, then this is the place to go, but it might sit on the heavy side for a lunch meal. They do have good salads here, but they were served in pretty large proportions. Other than this, the food is of decent quality. It just lacks a bit in variety. With this in mind, I'd rate the food at Silverwood a 7 out of 10. Silverwood faces an all too familiar challenge for a regional park, in that there is not a huge local population to get staffing from. It also is further limited in that it mostly has to pick from the local high school and college age groups during the summer season. I feel like this somewhat contributes to the operating season, since as soon as you see these individuals go back to school, Silverwood is left with a lot of difficulty in finding proper staffing. For the most part, a lot of the staff here seem to enjoy doing what they are, but again, there is an overall lack of staffing, which seems to contribute to the individual staff having to work much harder than they otherwise would. Now, this opinion is based off the fact that we mainly visit during the weekdays. Things could definitely look different during the weekends, but I am not aware if it is different or not. For most major rides, there historically is no more than 1 or 2 staff members operating it. If it is one, then the same person operating the switches is the same person who is responsible for loading and unloading the train and checking the restraints. This often leads to dispatch intervals in excess of 5 minutes. Now look, this isn't the fault of the staff, and it really is an unfortunate situation for everyone involved. If Silverwood did ever plan on expanding, I believe it would be necessary to offer jobs to people internationally, similar to how Cedar Point and Hershey Park do it. It will be interesting to see if it ever comes to this. Every person that we have met on staff has been overly pleasant and a charm to meet, so despite these challenges, it's been a good experience with them. Overall, I'd rate the staff at Silverwood a 7.5 out of 10. Continuing the resounding theme that the rest of this video has had, the coasters at this park are nowhere near bad and simultaneously not the best of the best for the most part. Silverwood has somewhat of a limited ride collection. With 7 in total, there's 2 wooden coasters, an Aero corkscrew, 2 kiddie coasters, and an RMC single rail coaster, and then finally a Vekoma giant inverted boomerang. Both wooden coasters here are good medium scale rides that provide fairly different ride experiences. I like to call both of them the temperamental 2, however. This is because, based on when you show up and how early in the season it is and the outside weather, the ride experience of these two can be quite variable. When it is the beginning of the season and the weather is colder, these rides tend to feel very sluggish throughout their courses. Later in the summer, on a hot day, both of these rides are actually quite enjoyable and show their true strength. Next, there's Aftershock, which is one of the last remaining Vekoma giant inverted boomerangs in North America. This ride is great and is very imposing on the rest of the park's skyline, but man, would I hope the trains on this can be updated at some point to feature vest restraints. It is not the most comfortable ride experience in the world, and vest restraints would do wonders for it. There really isn't much to say here about Corkscrew. It's a small-scale steel roller coaster that has a couple of inversions but doesn't do anything groundbreaking. Finally, there's Stunt Pilot, the new star of the show. This coaster is the best in the park by a long shot. In my opinion, Stunt Pilot really adds what this park felt like it lacked, a truly extreme thrill coaster. Now that we have it, I'm very pleased. This ride alone, in my opinion, can be a really good excuse to come out to visit the park. It's whippy, fast-paced, and feels completely out of control. Overall, I'd rate the coasters a 7.5 out of 10. Silverwood has a surprisingly solid collection of flat rides. It has just about everything you'd expect, plus a little more. It has all the staples such as a drop tower, a tilt-a-whirl, a Ferris wheel, a carousel, a train ride, and more. There really isn't much to say about this aspect of the park, other than the fact that I wish it had an S&S Scream and Swing. I figure Spin Cycle probably does a good enough job at providing for this style of ride, however. But, yeah, not really much else to say on this front. I'll rate the flat rides a solid 9 out of 10. You already heard me touch on this subject a little bit earlier, so I'll keep it brief. Mostly, at no fault of the individual staff members, the operations at Silverwood are less than stellar. I won't beat a dead horse here, but the only way I see this being addressed is through additional staffing. The staff members who are there are doing mostly fine with what they're given, but are not well equipped for success. Hopefully, this is one area that the park can improve upon in the near future. I'll give Silverwood's operations a 5 out of 10. I'll try not to focus too much on what Silverwood could be versus what it is, but this is somewhat difficult for me. You see, with the amount of land owned by the Norton family, Silverwood could be among the largest amusement parks in the country. There are a lot of reasons why I don't see this happening, at least not anytime soon. As mentioned earlier, one of the largest issues is staffing concerns. I'd be surprised if Silverwood would be able to find enough staffing to support an expansion like this. Another obstacle for this is economic feasibility. You see, as it stands now, Silverwood seems to somewhat struggle to attract large crowds. It would need to completely change the appeal for this park. Rather than staying as a regional amusement park, Silverwood would need to reinvent itself as a destination theme park. This isn't impossible, but would require a lot of risky investment that might not pay off. With how far away Silverwood is from major metropolitan areas like Seattle, it seems difficult to get tourists from that area to swing by this area of the Pacific Northwest. Sure, there is Spokane right near it, but this city on its own doesn't seem to do enough to attract tourists on its own. Moving through the individual rankings, I gave first impressions an 8 out of 10, theming a 6 out of 10, immersion a 7.5, layout 8.5, amenities a 7, food a 7, staff 7.5, coaster 7.5, flat rides a 9, and finally operations a 5 out of 10. This all averages out to a 7.3 out of 10 overall score. For what it's worth, Silverwood sits comfortably in the area of being an above average amusement park. I don't want this to sound too insulting at all. This park is really good, but it doesn't do anything that puts it near the top. It also doesn't falter in areas that would bring its quality down. It's obviously well maintained and never feels like it's falling apart, unlike some other parks in the region. As a coaster enthusiast, if not just for Stunt Pilot, I would still recommend visiting this park, as it does pack in a lot of charm into its small plot of land. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to leave a like and comment below and hit that bell icon. Special thanks to our Patreon supporters, Nathan Martin and Future Collective. $1 a month helps me bring even more content to you guys, and I even have some exclusive content coming, so check it out. Check the description below to find links to the rest of our pages. Thanks for watching the video, and ride on, Coaster Maniacs!